Greetings and welcome to the ROIClear podcast. My name is Ray Hightower, and today we are fortunate to have as our guest Mr. Kevin Cook. Kevin Cook is Senior Equity Strategist for Zacks Investment Research, and this man has eclectic interests. He's into aviation. He's into quantum mechanics. He's a quant who's into quantum mechanics. We're going to explore all of those and more. He's got entrepreneurial tendencies and urges. He's an investor, so many things. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Kevin Cook. Welcome, Kevin.
Hey, Ray, it's good to be here.
Great to be here. And I got to say, you've got the 10X hat and I've got this 10X banner on my desk. So, hey, let's 10X across the board. So that's wonderful. Glad to have you here. To kick things off, we typically kick things off with an elevator speech. And for those who are new to the ROIClear podcast, Kevin Cook is on an elevator with someone he wants to influence. So, Kevin, let's ask you, what would you say to that person in the course of an elevator ride?
Wow. Well, my biggest passion right now is helping teenagers discover their passion for science, because the world is changing so fast. We follow companies like NVIDIA and Taiwan Semiconductor that are just changing the world with accelerated computing. I grew up allergic to algebra. I was a math flunky. I was not a quant, and I had to teach myself probability and statistics in my 30s to have a career in financial markets. I think there's a lot of kids out there that need math to be brought to them in a new way. So I'm creating something I call story-driven math to get them interested in math and science and find out how they might learn it and accelerate their own exponential curve.
How does story-driven math work? If you're getting kids interested in math and science, I was my parents pushed my brother and me to get involved in math and science. And fortunately, we loved it. We got involved in a lot of it. How do you attract kids to math and science using stories?
Well, it's going to be different for different kids, but I'll just tell you, in my experience, when I looked in a textbook at equations, they meant nothing to me. It was a completely foreign language. My eyes glazed over. I couldn't do anything with it. So when I got into financial markets in my 30s, I was already a philosophy major, so I was interested in stories. And I found the story about how probability was created. There was this Renaissance nobleman, a gambler in France, who liked to play dice games. And he couldn't figure out this particular dice game and why one had a better advantage than the other. So he brought it to his friend Blaise Pascal, a famous mathematician and philosopher. And he was like, he shared that problem with his fellow math quant, Pierre de Fermat, and they exchanged a series of letters that basically cracked the code on probability that became the foundations for Monte Carlo, Wall Street, and Las Vegas. And that story pulled me in to learn the math. And then once I did, I was like, wow, I can do this. So that's just one story. And I was already interested in science. Well, science is, if you just talk about, how the moon was formed, and how it controls the tides of the earth and stuff, you can just tell a story about that can be fascinating to a kid. Then you can slowly introduce the math and say, well, let's just look at how this works with the math.
You've already drawn me in. I did not know the relationship between a gambler in France and Pascal and probability. I never knew that the dots connected in that way.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. And that was in 1650. Like there were ideas about dice, and we rolled the bones for, thousands of years. And we, civilizations understood some form of chance and probability, but we didn't have the precise equation where we could quantify it until Pascal and Fermat basically cracked the code in 1650.
So Pascal and Fermat, is that the same Fermat as in Fermat's last theorem that was not been proven?
Yep. That's him.
Dude, you were a total math geek.
And you asked about you asked about story-driven math. In 2017, I submitted a proposal to the National Science Foundation
Mm-hmm.
that that there should be an AI engine where a teacher or a student could put in curiosity prompts, something that they were curious about.
Mm-hmm.
How does the sun's radiation work? How are the oceans involved in climate? Just anything about science or math. And the AI engine would search the internet and the libraries of the world, and then use AR and VR to create a simulation of, come along, I'll show you what this is like, without
Mm.
using any equations. Draw them in to a custom story just for that student about science or math. That was in 2017, and when you read my proposal to the National Science Foundation, you could find it at the top of my Twitter feed. At Kevin B. Cook is my Twitter. The top of
Yes.
my feed, you can find the document. I was channeling ChatGPT, an engine that you
Oh,
could type
yes.
in prompts into and get back the answers you wanted. But I want to soup it up with AR and VR because we got kids playing video games. How many hours a day, right? And they
Right.
have no idea what a GPU is or how the GPU works to create those awesome graphics they're watching.
Is anybody doing something with ChatGPT plus AR and VR right now?
I still don't know. It hasn't come across my radar, but I would think that there are some. Actually, I did come across one because I'm about to apply to the National Science Foundation again for a
Yes.
November deadline.
Mm-hmm.
And I went on their site, and about 2 years ago, somebody did try and start that to integrate. Can we get a large language model to create something using AR and VR?
Man, it seems what you're describing is a logical progression.
Yeah, I mean, we have to use the tools we have, right? People, you'll hear different psychologists say, "Oh, there aren't different learning styles. There's no auditory, there's no visual learning style, there's no kinesthetic." I mean, to me, every kid is different, and I know
Yes.
that I was a math flunky, and I had to teach myself with stories and visuals. You know what else helped me is I was on the trading floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, standing next to options traders. And
Mm-hmm.
what these options traders were doing was simply fascinating to me. So I took some classes from one of the best instructors. In Chicago, we basically took the Black-Scholes options pricing volatility model, and we made it happen because we created an exchange for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so futures and options and derivatives, that's the bread and butter of Chicago. So I was standing next to these really bright people and learning from them, but I still was teaching myself probability. So I was behind the curve. Speaking of curves, when you get into the Black-Scholes model and derivatives, you start getting into, second order derivatives and third order derivatives, like something called gamma in options. That's all about curvature. I was like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
now I know what curvature is. Now I can find out what the other scientists who are astrophysicists or chemical engineers, I can find out what they mean when they talk about curvature.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. You study curvature, and essentially you're studying differential equations essentially when you're studying curvature, and you're
Mm-hmm.
taking your knowledge, what you've learned about, you're self-taught with DiffyQ. That's fascinating that you're able to do
Yeah,
that.
but
That's amazing.
I'm not gonna throw down some calculus on you. So that's where I stay sort of grounded, is that I know where I came from, and now I can see the stars and understand the universe in a new way. um, and so but I want to stay close to the kids. Like, where is
Yes.
the 15-year old who still can't even understand like a basic algebra equation? I want to help that kid and stay close
Right.
to them,
Mm-hmm.
and use it to show them the beauty of science.
Sure, sure. And you know what's so funny? Many times if they don't get it, it could be that they didn't have the right instructor or the right book. It could be that when they go home to study, there's a lot of noise around them, so they don't get to study. There's all kinds of factors right there. And so you're opening up opportunities that break through all of those obstacles. And I love that. That is, we should be helping each other the way you're helping people. And I love that. And you're coming up with ways to do that with math and science and stories. Can you give us an example of someone you've been able to help with this methodology? One of your favorite stories, perhaps.
Let's see. Well, I mean, I tried to start this even before I understood probability. In 1994, when I first went on the trading floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, they had a program where they did outreach to a rough neighborhood in Chicago, in the middle of Chicago. It was called Cabrini Green. I don't know if you've ever heard that name before,
Yeah.
but
I used to live in Chicago, but yeah, I know
okay,
exactly
yeah,
what
yeah.
Cabrini Green is. Yeah, yep.
What was the television show? Good
Good
Times.
times, yeah, with all
Yeah,
those, yeah.
yeah. So I went to Cabrini Green. It was Montgomery Ward,
Mm,
so I have to go into projects necessarily because they had an office building, but they had the 20th floor dedicated to tutoring kids,
mm,
and I was like, when I started the job at the Merc, I was making $6 an hour,
mm-hmm,
um, and I had small kids at home, and my wife was giving me one of these kind of looks, like,
mm-hmm.
"Are you serious?" Because
Yeah,
I could have done roofing and made $15 an hour, but I loved
yeah,
the markets and I loved helping kids. So
yes,
just to get them interested in math or science, because I know that nobody wants to look at a book full of equations, but if you can make it relate to their lives, so I would so that was in the 90s. And so fast forward to the iPhone, like most kids don't realize that they hold this little box in their hands that it used to fill a whole house full of computers to
yeah,
process the same amount of
yes,
data.
mm-hmm,
And then like the kids playing video games. In 2018, I saw a talk by Jensen Huang where he explained what ray tracing and rasterization were.
yes,
Those are just fancy terms for how his GPUs could create real-time CGI basically in the
mm-hmm,
video game.
yes,
And so nonstop, every time I meet a kid, I'm like, "Hey, do you play video games?" Yeah. "Hey, tell me about how the shadows work. Like when you're playing Call of Duty, you know, doesn't it seem like the shadows are real?" And they're like, "Yeah." And then they start. I get them talking about it, or whatever game they play, about how, yeah, it's. I said, when I was a kid and I went to go watch Star Wars, it took them months and months and months to create those computer generated images.
mm-hmm.
And I said, now the video game can do it like that. I said, don't you wonder how that works? And so I sort of try and draw them in with that.
Sure. So you approach them from a place where they are, Star Wars or some video game that's out there. You talk to them about, Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, and how they're doing ray tracing and how ray tracing is a mathematical representation of how shadows and reflections work. You have index of refraction going through materials, and then the angle of incidence, angle of reflection, bouncing off of stuff and all of this, and you're sharing all of that with them, and they care about it because you started in a place that they already care about.
Yeah. And hopefully I
Wow,
can,
Kevin, that's
yeah.
amazing.
And hopefully I can inspire them to see that if, like you and I, we didn't grow up with iPhones,
Right,
and we
right.
also didn't grow up with ray tracing. So
Yep.
to think that all this monumental stuff, this exponential curve, happened in a space of 20 years
Yeah.
is pretty phenomenal. So what I
Mm-hmm.
want to tell the kid is, imagine what's going to happen in the next 10 years, because it's only
Mm.
getting faster. The jobs are going to change. What you think you might want to do, that job might be there, but it may not.
Mm.
So learn if you learn this math and science, like keep playing video games, but
Sure.
also learn how the GPU works, so that you can have some control over your destiny
Mm-hmm.
and what jobs you might be able to have. The key is going to be math and science.
Math and science at the foundation, you understand those well, and then when the rest of the world changes, you can absorb it and apply it.
And adapt, right?
And adapt. Yes. Adapt. Yes. Yes. You remind me of something that Elon Musk has talked about. You know, he studied when he went to undergrad, he studied physics and economics because he believed in first principles. Or it may have been when he was studying those that he adopted his first principles philosophy. But the whole idea was everything else could change, but you know, as he likes to say, and he probably got this from someone else, physics is the law, everything else is just a suggestion. You know, it's based on physics, you know? So, yeah,
Yeah.
goodness. So, you know, here's what's so amazing about you, Kevin. You're taking your knowledge and passing it on to kids, and you're doing it in such a way that they get excited because it's based on stories. At the same time, you're a quant. And you know, tell us about that. Yeah, well, I mean, that's what they call it. And when I look at you and your resume, I think of someone like Jim Simons, who recently passed away, and what he's doing and
Oh
what he
yeah.
did with the industry. And oh boy, he was a giant, and the returns he was able to achieve are just outsized. I mean, he just created the quant industry. And
For
but
sure.
yeah, tell us about what you're doing in the quant space. And then at some points, we're going to talk about quantum mechanics, and you did something, you wrote something about the Wright brothers that I want to ask you about too. But yeah,
Oh,
let's go
okay.
into all of that stuff.
Yeah, so again, I'm nowhere near a Jim Simons. I'm not inventing anything new in derivatives. Although I do have some original ideas. You know, in the world of financial markets, there's people called technical
Mm,
analysts. They want to
yes,
chart. They want to look at the chart and say, okay, this is what price is doing or volume,
right.
and don't tell me about the company's last earnings report. I just want to look at the chart and I'll tell you where the
Mm,
stock is going to go.
mm-hmm.
Well, I think there's a big fallacy in that world where for a century, what these people do is they draw straight lines on charts. They'll take a ruler and a pencil and connect a series of highs and lows on their chart. You know, either it's you know, contracting or it's expanding.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and once a line is violated, it indicates a change of trend. Well, I did a thing about 10 years ago where I said that's mathematically absurd because markets are not linear, right? Markets are full of, you know, they're multidimensional and curved and, you know, derivative upon derivative. I said, for you to draw a straight line over two price points, you know, here's a high, here's another high, um, is almost like you're saying that the 25 billion economic events that occurred between here and here are suddenly ruled by a straight line
Mm,
when
mm-hmm.
markets are social beasts. You probably read Nassim Taleb's The Black Swan.
Oh yes, yeah, yes.
Yeah.
And
Well, you know,
anti-fragile, yeah, great guy, yeah.
yeah. So one of Taleb's mentors was Benoit Mandelbrot, who
Mm-hmm.
invented fractals,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Mandelbrot, like early in 2000, he wrote a book called The Misbehavior of Markets. And he taught us that, you know, I use the phrase markets are social beasts, but
Mm-hmm.
because they're social, because there's a trillion variables all bouncing off of each other, plus human greed and fear,
Yes.
um, they have what he called an inherent characteristic called wild randomness. And that's why standard deviation doesn't apply, right? So another original idea that I had after reading Mandelbrot and Taleb was that when anything can happen, there is no standard for deviation. And still nobody talks about that. Like this is a key concept. You can use historical volatility for all kinds of things. I mean, well, you can use standard deviation to measure biology, physics, and chemistry,
Mm-hmm.
but to use past price performance to tell you what's going to happen in the future is absurd because markets are social beasts. So there are traders who will make money with technical analysis, and I think that's great. But instead of drawing hard straight lines, what I say is, okay, what is the general trend? You know, what is the general trend of prices or momentum or volume? So just a couple of things. That's the farthest I'll ever be a quant.
You know, I want to make sure we grasp this because you used a term. I've never heard this applied to the market, but the word picture that you painted is so clear. You said markets are social beasts. You've just given a very clear word picture to the market. I've never heard anyone express it that way, but you make it it's clear. It's a very clear word picture. It's directly in line with something that Warren Buffett's mentor, Ben Graham, used to say, talk about the market. There's a Mr. Market that's a manic depressive. And one day he's really, really happy. And the next day he's really, really depressed. And it's always an extreme. And you can't listen to Mr. Market because Mr. Market is crazy, either very happy or very depressed, right? And that fits
Yeah.
perfectly what you said about social, the market as a social beast. I think it's a beautiful way to think of it. And we have to remember that because we can't get too excited when we do well in the market. We can't get excited. Oh, it's because I just predicted this or whatever. I knew it was going to happen. At the same time, we get too depressed if we lose money in the market because it's a social beast. It's all over the place, as you mentioned. So I love that you express it that way. I really love the way that you express it that way. Now, can we talk about NVIDIA and GPUs for a bit, because you're studying those, and what's going on in that space? I love what Jensen Huang and his team have done over at NVIDIA, but tell us what you've seen.
Well, I mean, last week was pretty incredible because while everybody still talks about the AI bubble, and NVIDIA's a bubble at 3 trillion valuation and all that, they still don't understand the quality of the product he's created and the
Yes.
demand for it. I mean, you could almost compare it to the iPhone. He's going to keep innovating, and there's going to be a new GPU, like there's a new iPhone, every 18 months these corporations must have.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yes.
So the big guys, Google, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, they're going to build the data centers. They can afford to pile up these GPUs and create these massively parallel architectures. And for for any of your audience who doesn't understand how different a GPU is when it comes and how it can create AI, I always give this simple analogy. The CPU in your desktop or your laptop, an Intel processor, used to be like a 4-lane highway. And now maybe it's like an 8-lane highway, but it can still have traffic jams. So that's the CPU world of traditional computing. What GPUs do, I say, it's like 100,000 piano players all playing at once, and there's no traffic jam. So the information is being processed simultaneously in what we call a massively parallel architecture. And so Jensen says, hey, we've got a $1 trillion installed base of traditional computing that needs to switch over to accelerated computing. So that's why Jensen's company, NVIDIA, is going to do well for years. And I think the stock will go to 200 in the next 2 years. I mean, what else is going on? Last week, Larry Ellison from Oracle, who people have kind of forgotten about because, Oracle databases are kind of boring, right? I mean, you know that better than anyone. He comes out and says, we have 162 data centers, 162, and we think we're probably going to build another 1,000 to 2,000. Like, whoa, So that's Larry talking about where this is going over the next 10 years. And it's not just about, Meta or Amazon having bigger databases so they can track all our information. It's about science too, because what Jensen gives power tools to scientists to solve problems with. We're going to cure cancer. We're going to figure out climate. We're going to find new sources of energy. We're going to change the world with accelerated computing. And AI is not just what ChatGPT does. AI is solving the world's most complicated problems.
See, there it is again. You know what? The general pattern I'm seeing with you, Kevin, is you're taking very complex subjects and breaking them down into everyday words. And that your highway metaphor is right on point. 2 lanes, 4 lines, 100 piano players all playing at once, and there are no traffic jams between them. It's all coordinated. That is beautiful. And then it fits with your hat and exponential growth and orders of magnitude, because a GPU with 256 cores or 1024 cores is going to be much more powerful on certain types of problems than a CPU that we're using today. So I love that growth that's right there. And you see, and yeah, I hadn't thought about Larry Ellison in a while. I mean, certainly they're the dominant database player, or the dominant database player, Oracle is. But he sees that they're going to go to many more data centers, really all on the Oracle platform or some form of that. And they were doing a bunch of acquisitions, maybe 10 years ago. Have they slowed down on acquisitions, or are they just more quiet about it? I wonder what's going on with them.
I would think they're pretty quiet.
Okay. They're still doing it, but they're just, shh, don't tell anybody, huh?
Yeah. One
Wow.
cool acquisition that happened a couple of weeks ago was, in GPUs, there's only two players. It's
Yeah.
NVIDIA and AMD.
Yep.
AMD, Lisa Su, she's brilliant. She's Taiwanese, just as smart as Jensen. She went out and paid $5 billion for a company that does data center infrastructure. Okay, so they would like help a Dell or an Oracle, with whatever, what connectivity or racks or whatever. She's going to sell that part of the business. She just wanted the engineers that work there. So she basically paid $5 billion to buy 1,000 engineers that are going to help her sell more AMD GPUs.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so it's on. And I understand the two of them are cousins, that Jensen and the CEO of AMD are cousins. I heard that
Oh,
somewhere. You know what?
never knew
Maybe
that.
I'm starting a rumor. Let's start. No, I read that somewhere that they're cousins. So, if they're like my cousins, we compete. Thanksgiving dinner is like, trash talking and all that. But I think it's good. What you just brought up, I think that's good. It's better to have multiple competitors because everybody gets better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there it is. There it is. There was talk once also of NVIDIA buying ARM at one point because they wanted the advanced risk machine. But I think they were blocked for antitrust reasons, or something was going on there. But
Yeah.
it would have been remarkable to see what happened there. We want to see
Because
what's going on.
because then they'd have the technology code that everybody else was buying. So it's like NVIDIA would be,
Yes.
NVIDIA would see inside of everybody's technology.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness, we could drill down into that for a long time. You have this depth of knowledge in that area that I just want to pick and drill down into. I want to make sure we respect your time and the time of our guests too, because there's something else you're doing that I found really fascinating. Let me read the title of one of your blog posts. Curiosity Solves Everything: How the Wright Brothers Changed History. Tell us about your passion for aviation, what's going on. Aviation, science, math, they all tie together. Bring it home, Kevin Cook.
Yeah. Well, I told you I taught myself math in my 30s.
Yes.
Now, I think I was very lucky to do that. And that's why I care. Like if a kid comes out of high school and goes through his 20s and doesn't learn how math rules the universe, they're going to be at a disadvantage because they won't pick it up later,
Yes.
But I did, so I was lucky. Maybe I could still help them. The other way that I was lucky is my dad was a pilot, and he taught me how to fly an airplane when I was 15 years old.
Yes.
Now, so I was very lucky. I want to give that back to kids that are less advantaged than I am. And there are two ways that I'm going to do that. I'm going to go into areas, high schools, neighborhoods where there are less advantaged kids, and teach them what's called aviation ground school. Now, aviation ground school can be a formal program that can take 6 weeks, and it's very heavy with books and instruction from professional pilots. I'm just going to give them like a mini course, and then I'm going to get them a free flight because up here in Wisconsin we have something called the Experimental Aircraft Association, and up in Oshkosh, me and my dad used to go up there and watch the planes do their stuff. My dad even flew aerobatics.
Wow.
But they have a program called the Young Eagles. The EAA Young Eagles will give any kid between the ages of 8 and 17 a free flight, their first free flight, a a certified pilot, takes them up and just lets them see things. Well, I
Yeah.
want to teach them the ground school first and see how interested they are, so that when
Mm-hmm.
they get out there, they're not just looking at the ground, they're looking at how everything works in the airplane.
Yes.
And
Yes.
now some kids who do that may decide they love it and they want to go on to be a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Others may
Mm-hmm.
say, that flying's not for me, but I really like other aspects of the airplane. I want to see if
Yes.
I can help design that. So
Yes.
that's another inroad STEM for kids, by giving them, hey, you want a free airplane ride? And if their parents approve, of course,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then see
Yes.
what happens.
See, there it is again. It's tying in. You're taking something that people care about, tying it to math and science, and you're making them passionate about math and science. And that's world changing. If you change the life of one kid like that, that alone could be world changing, because then they'll go on and change the lives of other people. That's wonderful across the board. That's amazing. Kevin, where does your desire to help people like that come from?
I think it's that uh, science and math inspired me. Like, they keep me
Mm-hmm.
going. It's like, if you say, what gets you excited, on any given hour of the day, or to get out of bed the next morning, is to learn something about science, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as you said, even if I can influence one kid who was a kid like me, who didn't understand math, or there's a lot of confusion out there right now. Look at the onslaught of media messages that we're
Mm-hmm.
drowning in, right? I mean,
Yeah.
a kid with an iPhone or an Android, they're getting bombarded with, you know a million messages a week,
Right.
and probably the majority of them are nonsense. So they're not really
Yeah.
learning about how the world works. And if you don't learn how the world works with math and science, then anybody can fool you.
Mm-hmm. That's a quote. That's a powerful quote. If you don't know how the world works with math and science, anybody can fool you. That's happening right now. Wow.
Yep.
That we're coming towards the end of our time together, and I could spend a lot more time with you. I know we're going to want to have you back, and I'm grateful for everything you've shared with us here. As we wrap up, let me ask you, what are you reading, or what are you recommending to people as a book that you like right now? Or what are you listening to? What are you doing to sharpen that saw in between the gears? Yeah.
Well, I'm writing a book called 13 Great Women of Science,
Hmm.
because I have a lot of daughters and granddaughters. And so I
Yes.
want to inspire the young females in my world learn science. And
Yes.
one book that inspired me is called Some Assembly Required. Some Assembly Required. So everybody should Google that book,
Wow.
because in there he didn't set out to write a book about women in science, but it just, because he's a biologist, it just sort
Mm-hmm.
of unfolded that way. Because he kept coming across all these discoveries that certain women made
Mm-hmm.
in the 20th century. One of them was Lynn Margulis, who was married to Carl Sagan. Uh, she came up with a theory about symbiosis, like how did the first complex cell form, where it had a nucleus and mitochondria. She came up with a theory of that it was one type of cell absorbing a bacteria,
Mm.
and that those structures became permanent and evolved that way. She was ridiculed for that theory for over 10 years. And in
Mm.
a male dominated science world, she got no respect,
Mm.
until like another 15 years later. Everybody was like, she was right.
Yeah.
This was the formation of the first complex cells. So I
Right.
recommend the book Some Assembly Required to everyone.
Wow. Some assembly required. We need to make sure we note that in the show notes. So we need to make sure we include that there. And then finally, Kevin Cook, how can people get in touch with you?
Sure. So I talk about companies like NVIDIA all day long
Mm-hmm.
at my workplace, zs.com.
Yes.
And you mentioned my quantum computing report.
Yes.
Quantum computing could be the future, but it could also still be, 20 years away.
Mm-hmm.
I just wrote a report that'll get published, and people will be able to get free access to it. You just go to the website and give them your email address, and they'll send you the report for free.
Wonderful.
So, and that has a lot of cool stuff in there, and it ties into my passion for science because Elon Musk wants to take us to Mars,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a great plan B. But I like plan A the best, which is where we try and solve all the problems we have here now and see if we can get along.
Mm-hmm.
And scientific discovery and Jensen Huang's GPUs are going to help us solve those problems.
Sure. Yep. We'll solve those problems. At the same time, we are still social beasts. So.
Yep. One more place people can find me is on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Just look. If you just look for Kevin Cook, you'll find me. I think my handle is LinkedIn KB Cooker Caveman. KB Cooker Caveman, I think is my handle.
We'll make sure that we include a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do a blog there where I talk about investing in real estate in Southeast Wisconsin because that's my home and I see all the exciting things happening. And this is where I want to build my first youth STEM lab and flight studio is in Southeast Wisconsin.
Wonderful. There you go, man. This is wonderful. Kevin Cook, it has been a pleasure having you here on the ROIClear podcast. There's so much more we could talk about. You're a wealth of knowledge, and we're grateful to you and glad to have you here, man.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
And thank you for engaging the ROIClear podcast. At ROIClear, we buy multifamily apartment properties, we improve them, and we give people a great place to live. At the same time, we give investors an opportunity to enjoy capital preservation, tax advantages, and a solid return on investment. If you'd like to know more, click the link to roiclear.com down below. We look forward to speaking with you.